Welcome to AMiNDR, a podcast where we usually summarize the latest publications in Alzheimer's disease for you, so you can spend more time doing awesome research. But that's not what we're doing today, Today you'll hear from Ellen Kosh, Ellen Rowe, Nyla Coleman, and myself, Sarah Dwedi, for a special celebratory episode for our anniversary. That's right, November 12th marks 1 year since Ellen K. and I met at the Allen Institute and spoke about AMiNDR for the first time. Ellen R. and Nyla joined not long after in the spring of 2020. If you want to hear more about the birth of AMiNDR podcast, check our very first episode, Welcome to AMiNDR, available on our website, amindr.com, as well as wherever you get your podcast from. We thought it would be nice for the four of us to meet today and reminisce over this year and share our thoughts on what's to come. Oh, it's happening. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. How's everyone doing?
Pretty good.
Not too bad.
Yeah, I'm good.
Good. Well, it's so nice to talk with you. I feel like we're always recording separately. We rarely have episodes where we're featured together. So this is really nice.
Yeah, super refreshing.
It's visually pleasing to watch the audio waves on each person. It's making a nice picture. Anyways.
That's true. Yeah, for our listeners, we're recording on Zencastr from different parts of Canada, actually. Mm-hmm. So we're not in the same room, and we're watching each other talk on the screen. We'll share a picture on social media.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
It's even in our colors. How nice.
So today we're celebrating 1 year since Ellen Kosh and I spoke about AMiNDR for the first time. And then Ellen Rowe and Nyla joined a bit later. And it's been like a year of this. So to start, where are we at with AMiNDR? What has happened in this year? Ellen Kosh, you've been doing a lot of work on production.
Yeah. There's been a lot that's happened this year. We went live with the podcast, and now we finished doing all of the papers that came out in June. And now we're working on covering all of the Alzheimer's papers that fit within our criteria for August and September. Our team has grown a lot, and we have over 20 people on our team now. So I think we've built this really great community. We've built a community on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram as well. So yeah, that's overall where we're at with AMiNDR.
Yeah, a lot has happened since I joined the team too. I joined the team a bit after the idea was first conceived, I guess. I think I joined maybe February or March. And that's when we were first trying to lift the idea off the ground and get it into something feasible and that we could do as a team starting as just three. Nyla joined shortly after I did. And it's amazing how far we've come since then. I love reflecting on it because we started out, we were like, okay, we're just going to do half the papers for 1 month. And we started out like with this rough idea that we wanted to divide the papers into themes. But we first started with 4 really broad themes, and we launched 4 really long episodes with those broad themes. As we gained new team members, we've really refined the process, I think. And we've got much more targeted themes, shorter episodes. We've gotten a lot better at summarizing the papers and delivering them in a way that sounds good on audio. Like, I think about going back and listening to one of my first episodes, and it kind of makes me cringe. But I think I'm really proud of where we're at right now.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's been, well, I remember when Sarah first approached me about the idea. So I think that was also around February, March. We first had, before we really filtered it down to our main mission for now, we had this very glamorous idea of summarizing 4 different neurodegenerative diseases in 1 month. And obviously that wasn't feasible for the starting point. But I agree, once we sort of narrowed down what we want to do first, I think it's been a really great learning experience for all of us, and really interesting how those things, like how to categorize papers, how to sort things, how to summarize, how all of that sort of, well, I mean, clearly it comes with experience, but how fast it came with experience, and how now it feels like summarizing an abstract is not second nature, but it's getting there. I can get through it a lot faster, and I feel more natural hosting than I did at the start. And of course, our team has grown a lot, which makes a huge difference as well.
Yeah, it totally makes a difference to have so many people involved. And I remember like in the beginning, it took a very long time to get this off the ground because we did a lot of research and tried to assess the market. See like if this was something people wanted, if this was something they needed, and really if it was a realistic thing to do. Because I do remember that day when Ellen Kosh and I met in my lab and we looked up at how many papers were published. We're like, okay, how many are we going to deal with? And we saw this graph and we freaked out because we saw thousands of papers. We're like, okay, there's like this many for ALS, this many for Parkinson's. And we looked at each other and thought, oh my God, we're not going to be able to do this together, like the two of us. We're going to have to recruit more people. But we spent a long time really assessing the feasibility of this project, which I think paid off. It really paid off to do that research in the beginning, because when we went in, we had a very clear vision and we had values too that we had discussed, and that really helped in recruiting people. I'm really happy that we started with the four of us because I trust every single person here. I know every one of you can make a decision for AMiNDR, and I know it will be in line with the values and vision of AMiNDR. So looking back, I'm really glad we put a lot of time and work into defining that.
Yeah, definitely. I think once we narrowed our goal down, like Nyla said, it became a lot easier and it started to feel more feasible. Yeah, and definitely once we recruited more members of the team, so it wasn't just the four of us pining through like 1,000 abstracts and trying to deal with them. It's great now to be able to kind of divide and conquer. And I think it really improves the quality of our work too. Like I'm definitely really much more proud of our episodes coming out now than at the beginning.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's crazy to think when I first met Sarah a year ago, I don't know. I don't think I would have imagined a year from now we'd have almost like over 40 episodes out and such a big team of people. So yeah, I'm also really proud of where we've gotten to and the quality of the episodes.
I guess, can I ask on that note, so having not been there at the very beginning, would you, if you had projected a year into the future back then, what would you have thought? That it was just you and Sarah and maybe Ellen summarizing all of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS?
Oh my gosh, I think I'd have a stroke.
And having sponsors fund it, I think that was another... Well, one question at a time. What had you envisioned, and maybe how is it different now? What things didn't happen, what things have happened? I'd like to hear that from Sarah and Ellen, especially.
Yeah, I guess I just didn't expect how much work it would be. So maybe my projection of what it would be a year from now back then was not very accurate because I didn't even really realize how many papers come out every month, for one thing. So I think I didn't know, expect that we'd need such a large team either. So that's part of the reason. I guess I didn't expect us to grow so much. So yeah, thinking back, I guess I thought maybe we'd have a few episodes out and they would cover all of the different neurodegenerative diseases. And yeah, maybe me and Sarah and a few other people would be involved. And I didn't really imagine it would become this like really nice community that we have. So kind of quickly, like we really increased the number of people so much over the summer, especially in the fall. But I really like the way that it's turned out. And I think that the way that we've sorted the episodes and focused on Alzheimer's disease is a good way to do it, to be able to have these high quality episodes.
I think it's also quite timely. I know, sorry, now we're speaking out of order. We're having a natural conversation. But I just wanted to say, I think it's quite timely that we're catching students while a lot of people have had to halt their research or at least reduce their time in the lab. So a lot of people are already doing like literature reviews and finding other things lab or research related to keep busy. So I wonder how much that worked to our advantage, that, a lot of us have less lab responsibilities right now and maybe more time to do this kind of work.
Definitely. That definitely played into me joining the team to begin with when we were kind of first getting curtailed with the research, and I had a lot more time to dedicate to this. And now I'm finding that as we're starting to ramp up in the lab again, it's hard to balance because this on its own is such a big task, and to do it properly and to do it well it's very time consuming. But yeah, definitely with the bigger team, it's a lot more feasible.
Yeah, I had envisioned that it would be a lot of work, and I did envision it being this big endeavor with different departments. And just so our listeners know, like, what we do behind the scenes is not just summarizing papers and producing episodes. There's a lot that goes on with advertising, for example, and communications and planning, and even like sorting the papers.
Oof,
Takes, I mean, Ellen Rowe can correct me on this. It takes, I mean, when I was doing it, it was taking me like maybe 3-4 hours a week. And I hear it's taking a lot more time now with a new team that we have. So that alone takes a lot of time. And even like producing advertising material and promotions and talking to listeners online. And so there's a lot of work that goes into this. And I knew it would be like this, but I didn't envision just the sheer amount of work. And I knew we would have a big team at some point. I didn't realize that each person would be spending so much time on their tasks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
And I was envisioning maybe 4 to 10 episodes a month, with one on like a couple on each disease, maybe not 30 episodes on just Alzheimer's.
Yeah, it's insane how many papers are published on Alzheimer's. I was talking to my boyfriend about it when I was first starting with the team, and I was like, did you know that there are 1,000 papers published every month? And he was like, what? He is in physics, and like there's 1 or 2 important papers that come out like every year, it seems, that he's reading. And I feel like I'm just glued to my laptop trying to keep up with everything new that's coming out, which makes this like such an important tool for our field, really, because it's so fast paced and there's so many small groups kind of working in parallel. Whereas in like physics, it seems like there's just one big team of people. I'm probably sound ignorant, people in physics, if they're listening to this, but it seems like it's just like one big team of people and they're all working to like find dark matter and they're all just working hard as a team to do it. Whereas like in Alzheimer's research, there's so many different groups of people and it's kind of competitive and there's just so much churned out so quickly. So yeah.
We should have started with physics, something small and totally outside our field. Yeah, maybe not. But I think, yeah, I also like going back to sorting and the time that goes into that. I think a lot of time, and we talked about this earlier, about how much time went into planning and really thinking about what we're trying to do. Also, the number of debates and discussions and like almost philosophical discussions about how to categorize things. I found that pretty interesting. Like, how do we make distinctions between what is a, I don't know, like a risk factor paper versus a disease mechanism? And it might seem like silly things to get hung up about. Maybe it is. But yeah, I think it's been really interesting to sort of also think about how we shape, well, not that we have that much power, but in a sense we're, you know, something like a podcast or any tool for research is shaping how people frame their work and what they're going to be looking at and what new topics they get introduced to. And so we had a lot of conversations at the start about what are people interested in? Would they just want to hear stuff in their disease model, or is it nice to branch out? And I think those were some of the most interesting conversations at the start to be having.
Yeah, we considered at some point splitting the episodes by hypothesis rather than disease mechanism versus risk factors versus diagnostic tools. We thought, oh, what if we had an episode on the the amyloid hypothesis? And then in that episode, we'd have all the papers on risk factors, disease mechanism, and treatment development, like all lumped together, but maybe where the papers would be clustered following that schematic. But then we decided, we always run into the problem of biases. Like, how do we keep our biases away from how we sort these papers and how we present them? Because that was a big part of our mission too, not to be biased in how we report, which is hard.
Yeah, that's I'm just thinking about how, like right now, about how our podcast has evolved and how we've, you know, every sort of evolution of the podcast through the summer and through the fall, we've been trying to make it think about what's the most useful to the listeners while also keeping our values. And one way that we have the value of being unbiased is by reporting on all of the papers that fit in our criteria. So I think that's one thing that's really important to us, is covering every paper from the month and not making judgment calls on the quality of the paper, but, you know, having the option for listeners to go and check the paper out themselves for looking at the quality of the paper. But yeah, overall, we're really just trying to make the best, what's most useful to our listeners. And it's going to continue to evolve, I think, in the future, coming months and years.
Yeah, I totally agree that it's constantly evolving. I think every iteration that we do, every month that we cover, we learn new things about how we should structure it, or what tweaks we should make with the sorting scheme, and that's something I've been involved with a lot too, is how do we sort the papers, because we're producing these nice packaged episodes, but we've got to make sure that the episodes are focused and they contain what you would expect them to contain, and it's a lot of thinking behind the scenes for sure.
Yeah.
A lot of philosophical discussions, like Nyla was saying.
Well, we had a discussion one time on what was a modifiable risk factor. Like, what can we modify, really? I thought that was interesting.
So then, talking about sort of how things have been going this year and how the podcast has evolved, what have you all learned with your experience with AMiNDR this year?
Okay, I will start. I think one of the areas that I've grown the most is learning how to go from that like really jargon-filled way that we write as scientists, like the way that we write grants and the way that we write manuscripts, to something that is like kind of like news reporting, something that is accessible, especially in an audio format, and not using words like the authors aimed to elucidate. Like, that's how we started. That is what my first episode sounded like. And now I've really grown and realized, like, okay, that sucks to listen to. So how can we change this to be more engaging, but still deliver the important scientific information that's there? So I know for sure with my most recent episodes and the ones I'm working on right now, I'm really focusing on that. I feel like I've mastered the extracting the important information, but now kind of tweaking it to deliver it in a way that's enjoyable to listen to. Like, I've been listening to the Daily podcast a lot, the New York Times podcast. I'm like, man, this sounds so great to listen to. How do I make my podcast sound like that? So that's been a big area of growth for me, for sure.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm not sure I'm as far along in terms of being able to really simplify things. I think this is a continuous problem for me, is like paring down to the most important information, not just in this podcast, but just in general. I tend to give too many details like I am now. So I think for me, that's still something that I'm learning is, okay, what do people want to hear? Do people want to hear methods? Should I keep that in? Is that important? What kind of details are important to keep in, but still make it like easy to listen to and enjoyable? And I think things I've learned besides that, I would say I've learned a lot about Alzheimer's. I've learned a lot about modifiable or not modifiable risk factors. So coming from a Parkinson's background, and now that I'm working in my postdoc, I'm also working with Alzheimer's and dementia. So actually just learning the content as I've been doing the summaries has been really helpful for me. The other thing I've learned is that recording is really weird, and there's a lot of lots of like ingrained habits in how I talk that come out when I record. You know, like you always start the sentence with "so this," "so
oh my gosh,
this," or
that too.
you always go back to the same. Yeah, there's just like so many habits in our language, and I've become a lot more aware of those. And not to say that I've stopped doing them, but I think that's been an interesting like personal growth as well, is just hearing myself and hearing how I get lazy in the way that I talk sometimes. So that was an unexpected learning.
Yeah, I find it hard to go back and listen to myself talk. I really don't like it. I like listening to everyone else's episodes, but I find it really hard to go back and listen to my own.
Ellen, imagine how I feel when I hear that intro every time. Oh my, it's like cringy.
Neurodegenerative disease research.
I hate it so much. Whenever I edit an episode and I have to put it in and I have to listen to it, I'm like, oh my goodness, people are tortured with my voice every time. Like, I hate it.
I love it. It's so soothing. I could play it on loop. Yes.
Yeah, it sounds great.
I really like it too, but that makes me wonder if we should eventually have like all of us, everyone on the team, record a welcome to AMiNDR, just to like, so that we could switch it up per episode. Not that I don't want to listen to your voice.
I kind of like that the consistency. Like I was saying, like I've been listening to the Daily a lot. And he's always like, I'm Michael Barbaro, and here's what you need to know today. And I love that. I love opening with that. So
yeah, that's true. It's a good familiarity it's like, okay, I'm here now. This is comforting. I'm about to learn a lot, but it's so good.
I wonder if you could do one like with different voices echoing together that would be played every time. So the three of us like, welcome to A minor.
That would be interesting.
Gosh.
Or all of us singing in chorus over
Yeah,
Zoom.
that reminder theme song.
Next year. That's where we'll be a year from now, guys.
That's where we're headed.
Singing science to people, producing original songs about Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, all of the summaries will have to be in song form or poetry form. Slam poetry science. I guess that exists, yeah. Anyways.
I guess that branches as well into where are we headed with AMiNDR. Sarah, Ellen, what are your visions? And Nyla?
Well, there's short-term and there are long-term goals. In the short term, we'd like to get to a point where it's not so overwhelming. I think Ellen is very humble, but I think she spends like close to a full-time job's worth of time on it, as I do. So we would like to get to a point where we can split the work, where it's manageable, where it's enjoyable right now. But because there's so much going on behind the scenes, it's hard to really think about the big picture because we're constantly looking at small things, editing, producing. So we'd like to get to a point where we can do that. But I would envision it to be a big organization with different departments, with people working in like their small committees, but also communicating across these different committees the way we do in our big team meetings. And it would be nice to branch to another disease a year from now. Alan, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I guess in the long term, I imagine it hopefully becoming a podcast about all of the main neurodegenerative diseases. So branching out to Parkinson's disease. I know there's a lot of people out there that are interested in us branching out to Parkinson's and people on our own team that do Parkinson's research. For myself, it would be nice to have a podcast like this for Huntington's disease because that's what I study in my PhD work. So, and then ALS or other diseases or other topics even. You know, this is where I see it heading in the sort of further future as a long-term goal. Short-term, I agree with what you said, Sarah, getting more people on board on our team in content development and producing the episodes so that it's more manageable for us and we can also focus on our PhD work.
Yeah, we need to get Huntington's in time for you to write your PhD thesis. Like just when you're writing your literature review. Yeah.
It would be so helpful. It would be amazing.
We were actually wondering, we're thinking, okay, if we were to add a disease, should it be one that's small, like that has fewer publications, so it's more manageable, like something like Huntington's or ALS, or should we go with popular demand, like Parkinson's? But we were a bit worried that people on the team would jump to Parkinson's and stop doing Alzheimer's.
Yeah, that is a concern.
Yeah, maybe wait until we have more team members, because for sure, I think there's enough expertise around Parkinson's that it would be the natural next thing to add, even if it means a lot of papers. Or, you know, maybe we could add like one theme within Parkinson's at a time to not like overload too much. But I think we're still a little ways off from that. We definitely still have some work to do, like, as you said, making it less work, especially for the, I guess, the core team, mostly Ellen and Sarah. I know this is a ton of work for you, and I know you're doing all of this on a volunteer basis. So I think the things that I'm hoping will come in the next year is just like a more streamlined system where we're releasing episodes in a timely manner and there's like just less following up and task delegating for the two of you and more just like sitting back and enjoying the fruits of your labor. I know Ellen you're working really hard on this too. And we had we had talked for quite a bit at the beginning about sponsorship, about trying to make this not a volunteer run endeavor.
That would be great.
And I think that would be great. I think we were a little like rose-colored glasses at first about, which is great. I'm not saying that we can't get it there, but as we add more team members, as we realize how much time we're putting into this, I think it's going to be a while before we get funding to actually cover and compensate everyone for their time.
Yeah, just to give a sense, we have 23 people working on this now. I estimate a couple hundred hours a month between the 20 people. But something actually that I would like to do a bit more in the next year that I've actually learned too through AMiNDR was not to discount other areas of expertise, like things like marketing and social media. And like, I think we targeted neuroscientists a lot in our recruitment. And we assumed that there are these skills that we could pick along the way, like design. And like for me, social media, I thought, oh yeah, how hard can it be? I'm just going to post here and there. I do this every day. But no, there's a lot that goes into that, a lot of thinking and strategy. So working more hand in hand with people who have that knowledge, and they're welcome to join the team if you're listening to us. That would be great.
Yeah, I think we definitely want to expand that this coming year, our advertising team and marketing and design, as well as other, pretty much all parts of the team. But that's definitely something we're focusing on too, and building that community that we've started to build. And Sarah and the advertising team have done a great job with that. And Ellen also does some of that on Instagram. And like one thing I've learned through working on the podcast that I kind of knew about, but I didn't know that much about is this Twitter community and online science communication and academic community. And since starting to use Twitter, I've actually, found out about new papers that came out that I wouldn't have heard about, and found out about other science communication tools and networks that are available. So there's definitely a great community, and we really want to keep building that community with our listeners.
I'm glad you brought up Twitter because I had no idea that so much was going on there when I was doing my grad studies. And now I feel like I really missed out. Not only papers being published, but connections being formed and networking opportunities. Like I was talking with a PI the other day on Twitter that just happened to message to thank them for following us, or just getting some advice from people on mentorship. So if you're listening and you're not on Twitter, I highly recommend doing that.
Yeah, I am listening. And I have been told that so many times, and especially recently as I'm getting more into the science communication world, I recognize that it's important, but man, it's hard. As you said, Sarah, there's a lot of strategy that goes into social media, and it's just like, I can't invest the energy right now. And anyways, that's my personal, not to make this into a counseling session for me, but yes, I have heard I need to be more active on Twitter. It's like I need to eat an apple a day or something. I need to exercise and I need to be active on Twitter. Got it. Message received.
Yeah, we've definitely made some great connections on Twitter too, and even we'll talk to listeners, and this is mainly Sarah that's been doing this, but even recruited people to our team, I think. Is that right, Sarah?
Yeah, Jack came through Twitter. It was so funny. I need to tell the story because I messaged him to thank him for following us, and then he responded. And like as always, I always ask for feedback, and he actually sent me pages and pages of written feedback for each episode, and he downloaded our episodes, and we had this peak that day of downloads, and I thought, wow, we must be doing really well. And then I learned that was the one day that Jack downloaded all of our episodes, and he would listen to them every day and write feedback. And then we met up online on Zoom because he's in the UK and we're in Canada, and spent like 3 hours on Zoom with him giving us like feedback from his perspective. And he ended up joining the team because I thought, you seem to know a lot about this. Why don't you come do it? And he's like, yeah, let's do it. So that's great. And then there are a few people that joined through Instagram. So Satish and Courtney, I think, found us on Instagram.
Yeah, I've recruited a couple from my Instagram too. I've been plugging in Grinder, and I met Courtney actually at a conference last October. And so we've been following each other on Instagram, and she reached out. She's like, hey, this sounds really cool. And I was like, yeah, message our AMiNDR Instagram page. And then Maggie too, she's from North Bay. She saw it on my Instagram too. So yeah, social media is a great tool.
Definitely.
I had no idea. I always thought there should be a separation between social media and work. I feel like maybe that was just in my lab. Whenever I spoke about Facebook, people you could see them grimacing, like, oh, you use Facebook, but maybe Facebook has a different reputation. But I always felt like, oh, like you don't mix work with social media. But now it feels like that line has been blurred. Like if you're not on social media, you may be missing out on work opportunities, which is really interesting.
Message received again.
Oh, sorry,
No,
Nat.
no, it's good. It's good. I agree
Nyla.
with all of those things. And actually, I have to say, like, it's been nice. Well, the pandemic has not been nice, but it's been nice to connect with people online, like over Zoom, and all of these like little random encounters that were always possible, but that, well, that are definitely amplified now. And even like online conferences, I know that some of them are run very poorly and really don't use the virtual space to their advantage. But others, like I participated in the ComSciCon, so like the Canadian Science Communication Conference, and I felt that they really used the platforms to their advantage. Like you could, it's nice to be able to communicate in several media at once, like to communicate through, you know, the presentation, but then also through the chat and emoticons, and you have side conversations, and there's like less of this. Sorry, this is a total tangent. But just speaking of online communities, like it's much more approachable. As you said, Sarah, you can talk to a PI from another part of the world on Twitter in just a quick exchange. Whereas like at a conference, there's all this like, I have to like, there's a build up to go and talk to someone, or you just end up kind of sticking with people you know. And yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities. And if I was more social media savvy, I could tap into them.
I mean, it's intimidating online too to tweet at people. Like I didn't do that for the longest time, and I just started, like, I garnered the courage to tweet at people that I don't know to get their attention on Twitter. But no, I mean, I know it's a tangent, but I find it really interesting because in medicine, we speak a lot about professionalism and how like there's a time when you say professionalism, it was what you did in the office and with patients and how you presented yourself on the street. But now with social media, there's this window into your personal life that you have to be very careful about, and how you present yourself, how it can be interpreted regardless of your intent. And I find that very interesting. So that's why I was talking about that blurred line now with personal versus professional life.
How is AMiNDR affecting other aspects of your life or work? Has it changed the way that you do the research or how critical you are of the literature that's coming out?
Well, Ellen, I am glad you asked. I will answer that in order. It's a good question, though. I actually haven't thought about that much. I guess, so as I mentioned, I just started my postdoc, which also is on Alzheimer's disease and dementia. I'm working on like a very non-scientific research project. So it's on knowledge translation and using performing arts to create pieces around like both the scientific research of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, but also the lived experience. And so a lot of this work it's very new to me. It's a huge transition from working in a lab. So it's been really good for me to learn about Alzheimer's research, and especially, so I've been hosting the non-pharmacological approaches episode and the modifiable and now also not modifiable risk factors episodes. I think those have been really useful for me. I would say one, not really tension, but one thing that I've noticed between my postdoc work and research in general around Alzheimer's disease is this, like, when we talk about research, we're talking about Alzheimer's patients. We're talking in very like objective terms and very dry terms and very scientific, which I love. I love thinking about proteins and disease mechanisms and signaling pathways, but it's so far removed from what someone with Alzheimer's or dementia is experiencing. And sometimes that I find that tension in myself of like talking about things from the scientific perspective and being really interested in just the biology and physiology of what happens in Alzheimer's disease. And then taking a step back and being like, oh, right, this is someone's experience. This is what someone lives every day. And I think that always comes back to me that the language, the scientific language and how we frame things around Alzheimer's disease there is very different and very removed from how we should or how we do talk to people with Alzheimer's disease or dementia and caregivers and family members. And it needs to be, I think the distinction needs to be there, but I also think there needs to be more exchange between the two.
Yeah, that's something I've thought about too, with Alzheimer's as well, with the podcast, and also in my own research with Huntington's. I've had a similar experience where I'm really, really excited about my experiments and finding out new things about the disease and the mechanisms. But then sometimes I'll see like an article about somebody with Huntington's disease, like a like a pop culture article or something like that. And it kind of makes you realize like why, I guess the bigger picture of why we're doing this research.
Agreed.
Which I think we forget a lot of the time.
Which is why we're adding these bonus episodes next year, where we'll be bringing people from different parts, not just of research, but also caregivers and people with lived experience, and representatives from the industry, and hopefully advocacy as well, so that these voices can be heard. And yeah, there's definitely benefit in reminding trainees in neuroscience who the research is for. Even in terms of ethics, whenever you run an experiment, it's I think it's really easy to get into that mindset of publish or perish, and like your career, think about your career and how many papers are going to get out there and how many experiments can you run. By the end of the day, that's not what matters. This is not what research is for. It is for the patient's improvement of quality of life and survival.
Mm-hmm. You can also have a chance to talk about it too, Sarah, about how AMiNDR is affecting your life and work.
It's interesting because there's not too much overlap between what I do with AMiNDR and medical school. It would have had a lot of overlap a few years ago when I was still doing research. But there are some points, like there are things I learned in class that make me think about things we do in AMiNDR. Like, again, I'm bringing back the modifiable risk factor discussion we had, because we had that discussion in class. And I remember being very involved in that discussion because that was really, really interesting to know how to better divide those episodes, and then brought that back to Slack where Nyla and I had an exchange about it. And so that was one way in how like what I learned in school is affecting what I do with AMiNDR, and vice versa. What I do in AMiNDR makes me think about things in school a bit differently. So one thing I learned is, for example, what is a predatory journal? And I brought that back to class, and someone was like, what is that? I'm like, yeah, you should look at the journal in which the paper is published. Like, not just if it's a peer-reviewed paper, but how does the journal conduct the peer review process, and the authors, like what's their background? So things like that we don't really talk about in school, that I had to think about with AMiNDR.
Yeah, definitely chiming in on the predatory journal stuff. And so I took a course this summer about how to conduct research, basically, and research quality. And that's something I think about a lot when I'm doing my AMiNDR work too, because like we've said before, we don't screen every paper. We don't go through and read every paper and make sure that they've gone through all the necessary hoops and hurdles to perform good science. And so that's actually something that makes me feel a bit uneasy when I'm doing my episodes, because I come across some papers that are published in peer-reviewed journals, but when I delve into them a little bit to generate my summaries for my script, I find that I don't really know if they can make this conclusion from the data that they've gathered here. And so that's something I wanted to talk with you guys about too, is if you guys have run into that and how you deal with that. I still include it in the episode. I just try to be transparent about, okay, the study was only done in 50 people, and this is what they found. And I exclude the last sentence where they're like, and this is revolutionary for the field. But yeah, have you guys run into that? What do you guys think?
Yeah.
It's awkward.
Yeah, that's something. Yeah. Some abstracts are more descriptive than others too. So sometimes, they'll say they got there's certain results that show this certain, not really saying this very well, but they got a certain result, but they don't even really describe their methods or something in the abstract.
I find myself going to the paper often now.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, did they really find this? And that's when it becomes a huge time sink for me. And I need to really realize when to chill and
I think we need to, we don't want to be going to the papers because that is a time thing. Sometimes I think I do a similar thing to what you do, Ellen, and I try to be transparent about it. And sometimes I say, there wasn't much detail in this abstract. So, you can check the paper for more detail on their methodology. I know one time there was a clinical paper that when I actually took a closer look at the paper, they really had hardly any people.
Yeah.
Like there was only 10 people or something. When it sounded like there were more by the way the abstract was written. So
I think, it's difficult to find the balance. Like we were saying earlier, we don't want to be biased.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's difficult to find the balance between when I come across a paper that's kind of, that I'm skeptical about, being transparent, as you said, about like, this was done in however many people, a larger study is needed to support these conclusions, adding in a sentence like that. But also, if I haven't fully read the paper, and I haven't, I do glance at in those scenarios, I do glance at the paper as I'm summarizing. But if I haven't read the full paper, I can't be more critical than what I see in the abstract, right? I can't, maybe I'm missing information, and maybe other abstracts that sound really great, if you read the details, they're not. So I think I'm trying to leave it up to the listener, but it is awkward. There are some papers that, yeah, also like sometimes the topic or of something just like doesn't quite sit right with me, and then I have to put it aside and say, okay, this is up to the listener to delve into.
Yeah.
That said, I don't know how much, one thing, thinking about our podcast, we're making papers and we're making summaries accessible to people, and I, as a student, would probably just listen to this and be like, okay, I'm caught up now. Of course, I would follow up on some papers, but I would take it as like, okay, that's true now. That's a fact.
Yeah, and that's what I think about a lot. Like, if consuming the podcast, I'd be like, okay, now I know everything. Now I know this is a relevant biomarker. Now I know this, and it's like, oh well, not quite.
Yeah, and maybe that's something we should consider. Just we had talked about putting disclaimers, in our episode notes, or maybe at the start or end of an episode, of like, this is what we've reiterated, this is what we're doing. We're not going into the quality of the paper and so on. I don't know if we need to do a disclaimer.
Yeah. I think the way that we're handling it now, kind of fielding it with, adding in, this study was done in 10 people versus this study was done across 3 cohorts with, 1,000 people each. And including those details, so that at least while our listeners are listening, they can start to make the judgments themselves. That's what I've been doing anyway with my biomarkers episodes, is just including that kind of data to kind of parse apart the papers who really did a thorough, rigorous job, and those that are more of a pilot study. And then, like you said, Nyla, adding in something that says like, well, and this needs to be validated in a larger cohort. So
the way, I've encountered that a few times from different fronts. So one, in terms of the quality of the paper, but also in terms of, is it evidence-based? Is it something that that should be included in the podcast? And the way I deal with it is that I go back to our mission and our vision. We're here as like a flash news. So when a reporter reports on what happens in the world, they don't pick what they like and they don't like in what happens in the world. It's like, it is what's been published. So we're not here to select, because there are biases there, and then plus the time sink and having to go back to the papers. That's how I think about it, is that I'm here to just report what is there, and it's up to the listener to go back to the paper if they want more information about it. And I'm also very careful on how I report at the end. Like, I wouldn't say this holds great promise, but more like, this shows some potential based on these results to do what the authors claim they do. And also making sure that we're saying what the authors are saying. So like, the authors did and the authors think, rather than what we think.
for sure.
So like, I think it makes a great deal of difference to say the authors concluded or the authors speculate, rather than this shows this.
You know what could be fun to do? Actually, 2 thoughts. One is to have like an episode where we talk to maybe a senior PI or even a like postdoc student, and have them sort of just have like a conversation about how you parse through a paper, what's like critical reading and critical thinking as you go through a paper. I'm sure there's like tons of workshops on this and classes and journal clubs and so on, but it could be interesting to have it as like a more informal discussion. The other thing I thought, just randomly, as a fun episode to do, is have people, like different professors, maybe even the ones or different authors of the papers that we're covering, have them like read out some of the funniest reviewer comments they got. I think that could be fun.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I think people would relate to that for sure in our listener base.
Future, is that someone going to write that down? I guess we have an audio. Yeah, it's like, is that writing?
Oh yeah,
we have audio record of the idea.
I'm actually taking notes as you're talking.
That's your writing.
But yeah, and then sorry, just going back to the evidence-based, if this is not evidence-based, because that was actually a huge conversation we had back in March before we started this, the inclusion and exclusion criteria. And again, that's when we thought again about our biases, because there are a lot of great findings that came out later after a lot of experiments and studies were run, and thought, oh, okay, this is now evidence-based. So is it fair now to discount something just because the evidence is not there yet.
Yeah, because it's fringe or alternative or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah. Did everyone answer that question? Or is that... Oh, yeah, Ellen.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I was thinking about how AMiNDR's affected my life and my work especially. And I guess one thing that I didn't necessarily expect is, since I work on Huntington's disease, I didn't expect a lot of, I'm still interested in hearing about Alzheimer's research, but I didn't expect it to relate to my work. But I have found it has in a lot of ways. I find that I've learned a lot about neurodegeneration in general and how a lot of these neurodegenerative processes are actually similar between different neurodegenerative diseases. And so it has given me insights into my own research as well, where, I hear things that are affected in AD that are also affected in Huntington's disease. Like recently, when I was hosting one of the preclinical testing episodes, I found out that calcium handling is affected in Alzheimer's disease, and that's a big topic in Huntington's disease right now.
Mm-hmm. And in Parkinson's.
Yeah. And another episode I was recently hosting was about cognitive testing to diagnose Alzheimer's disease. And one study was looking at like subtle behavioral changes in young mice. And it's really related to what I've been doing lately, looking at young Huntington's disease mice and looking at subtle changes in behavior before they have the overt symptoms of the disease. So those are just a couple ways that it kind of related to my research. And also, Nyla, you mentioned the risk factor episodes earlier, and I found those ones are really, I don't know, just general, like some of it's just like general knowledge that I find really relevant to our lives. So
I think that's a really good point you bring up, because that's also something when I was studying, well, I am still kind of studying Parkinson's, but one thing that came up often in my PhD is like how much we also categorize research by disease instead of by process, like by physiological processes. And so I would never search literature in Alzheimer's or in Huntington's, even though the disease mechanisms, the circuitry is very similar. And so like there's a lot I could learn from going into that research, but because there's so much literature and because we have to categorize everything, we just stay within our disease. And yeah, I think that's a really good point, is that, and also a really interesting point, like how do very similar disease mechanisms, very similar risk factors, similar circuitry, how does that result in such different clinical manifestations? I think that's a really interesting topic, and it's given me ideas as I've been summarizing papers on the comorbidities, like with diabetes, for instance. It's also made me think back at Parkinson's disease as well. So it's been really interesting.
It's interesting you're bringing that up, because with sorting, I mean, when we download the abstracts, we search for Alzheimer, and there are a lot of papers that come down that are not about Alzheimer's, but are kind of related. So things like if you're looking at MCI, or if you're looking at dementia in general, or frontotemporal dementia, and we sometimes wonder, okay, do we include this paper? Do we exclude it? And sometimes it's just so relevant to AD that it has to be included. And is it fair to exclude the other ones?
Yeah. I'm wondering, when we like expand to other diseases, I wonder if this could influence how we structure that. Like, should we categorize them by disease, or should we categorize the episodes by the mechanisms?
Yeah, and I think as we gain a better understanding of Alzheimer's disease and dementia, and as we realize that most dementias are actually mixed dementia, like you often don't find a case of just plaques and tangles in someone's brain. Like there's often so much else going on. There's signs of vascular dementia and other comorbidities. And so the lines really do become blurred. And I think, Niall, you bring up a really good point about how we innately categorize things based on disease and not physiological process. And that's a weird thing that we do. We really should be looking at it the other way.
I was just thinking that too. Yeah, like common, calcium signaling or mitochondrial dysfunction, oxidative stress. I think those are things that are common between at least, Parkinson's, Huntington's, and Alzheimer's. And it could be interesting. It'll be harder maybe to sort, but I think it'd be interesting to get people thinking outside of their preferred disease. Sounds wrong, but
Yeah.
Well, you know what? There are quite a few people I contacted on Twitter that happen to be studying Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, or not studying by disease, but studying a process like aging, right? So there might be a need for that. It might be something that trainees need more than the categorization that we have in place now.
Yeah, like we said, we evolve with every iteration. We always come up with these new ideas. We're like, hey, why don't we try this? So I'm sure as listeners, you guys will see a lot more different versions of the podcast along the way and through next year. Got to start somewhere, though. We're just starting with the Alzheimer's search term, doing this, but
yeah, we started with a beast out of the four of them.
Yeah. And remember that time we had the Sarah, you had the idea that we could like wow. Sorry guys, automate the summarizing. I was thinking about that again recently, how much time it would save, and yet would it still have the same? There's something nice about having humans do it, but man, we could cover so much more.
Actually just talked to someone else in my my class about it a few weeks ago and sent him a few summaries so he could play around with using AI to generate summaries, because that would save us a lot of time. But aside from the value we try to bring to the listeners, we're hoping it would bring value to the team members, where this would be kind of an opportunity that doesn't hopefully impede on your research but complements it and helps you do better research by, you know, keeping you accountable to read all these papers and summaries.
But imagine how many more listeners we had if we said that we were AI powered.
I don't know. I mean, you bring out this kind of like is a nice segue into something I wanted to talk about with you today about, do you think we are bringing value to the listeners? And it's something I'd love to hear the listeners' viewpoint on, like, is how valuable is this podcast to you? How can we make it better?
I mean, if someone just listened to us talk for almost an hour, hopefully either they're getting value from it or entertainment, or maybe both. Yeah, I think that's a question that is up to our listeners to answer.
Yeah, we definitely like hearing from listeners and how the podcast is working for you. When listeners do reach out, we're really trying to make this, as we said many times, as valuable as it can be for the listeners.
I know when we started, we all had these ideas of what would be cool, and this like, oh, I would love this. But I feel like there are a lot of projects like that when you started thinking it would be cool. And then I wonder, I'm like, is it working? Is it helping? Because at the end of the day, that's our mission. At the end, is not that we don't just want to create a podcast. The podcast is just the product of what our why is. Our why is to help people save time.
On the other hand, though, I think there's also the side of like our listeners. That's a big, I mean, not saying that we're a huge podcast, but I'm sure there's a lot of variety in what people want, and not everything will be found here, you know? And I think as long as we bring value to some people, hopefully a large number of people who are studying Alzheimer's or related conditions, I think we're doing well. And I think that sometimes there's also a role of, you know, the person delivering the service to say that this is a useful thing. And not always there's a fine balance between adjusting. And I think, as you said, we're very happy to adjust to what our listeners want. But there's also a role in, like, as you said, staying true to our core values, our core mandate, I suppose, and delivering what we want to and what we think is useful.
For sure. Yeah. Not rerouting too many times. I was going to say, like, I think we are delivering a valuable product. I'm just going to come out and say it. I think that the concept of sorting all these papers into themes and providing an overview of a little pocket of research is really cool. And I hope that, you know, people see our product and are like, wow, that's really cool. And someone launches something like this for cancer research and something like this for other like biomedical research, because I think, like I've already said, probably sound like a broken record now, but stuff is being churned out so fast and there's so much of it, and combing through and pining through the volume of papers and presenting it in an informative and accessible way is so important. to connect the researchers. And I think that we are making strides to start doing that. And that in itself is really valuable. So
yeah, I agree. That I think it is a useful product. And I think I kind of see it as like, not just like, I mean, it's not a regular podcast. It's like an open source tool to help research and to make research more efficient, and maybe to expose people to research they might not have heard about initially. I know for me, like the last time I felt caught up on papers was when I was studying for my comps a couple of years ago. So I really think it is a useful tool for scientists, and I hope that we can expand. The goal is to expand to other diseases, and maybe inspire people in other fields to try out this idea as well.
Mm-hmm. Someone did reach out to us from the MS group being like, can you do this for MS? Like, no, we can't now, sorry. We can help you do yours if you want, but we're not there yet. But we'd love to expand and have other diseases in the future.
Yeah, I hope we get some copycats. That'd be cool.
Yeah, I think, one of the reasons that I was so enthusiastic to get involved when Sarah first approached me is that one of the biggest like disenchantments, is that the right way to say it? But yeah, like the things that I realized and was really disillusioned about, maybe in year 2 of my PhD, which is generally a rough year for people.
Cheers to that.
Yeah, it's just how inefficient research can be, how much wasted resources there can be. Yeah, how not being caught up on the literature really impedes progress. And I was terrible at it throughout my PhD until maybe the last year, until I was writing my thesis. So I understand why it happens, but I think that really drew me to getting involved in this podcast, because I think, even if labs are individually doing really great research, I think there's a lot that needs to happen at a bigger scale of academic research to make things move along faster, to not waste resources, to mitigate the negative impacts that we have as well, like in terms of resource waste and environmental impact and so on. So I'm hoping, that's a big task for a small podcast, but I'm hoping that we're doing our part in that. So
yeah, I totally agree with all that you just said. I am in my second year of my PhD, and I'm starting to become disenchanted just like that. I'm like, oh man, everything's so wasteful, and what are we doing? And so wow, that really resonated with me. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I will say there is a re-enchantment eventually. I somehow got suckered into a postdoc, although my postdoc is also trying to address that, like moving knowledge from research into the community. I think that's where I found my home. But don't lose sight. I'm gonna plug Green Lab initiatives. So like if you're concerned about the environmental impact or resource waste of research, I recommend that you check out some like Green Lab initiatives that have been popping up around the world. Yeah. And this is a different topic, but just in terms of like how science can be done better, I think that's another area that people should start thinking about. Start a podcast on it.
Green Labs is at UBC too. I was looking into it before.
Awesome.
To become like a lab representative, I think it's called.
Yeah, so there's different ones. There's a website called Lab Conscious. There's, I think, My Green Lab. We started a while ago at the Neuro at McGill. We started the Green Labs initiative at the Neuro, and now it's kind of been branching across McGill. So I think there's a lot popping up, and it's hard. It's hard to do it like a grassroots thing. It's difficult when you still rely on big companies to supply. Well, and like we need to use plastic in our experiments. Like we need to waste in our experiments, but I think just recognizing that we use a lot more resources than we need to, and we waste more than we need to. And especially if you're not staying caught up on the literature, you end up reinventing the wheel or just like doing experiments wrong because you don't know better, and something to keep in mind. But maybe we should end that on a positive note. I do think, well, I really think this is the value of a podcast like this.
Yeah,
And I think this
definitely.
is the value of, well, also of conferences and exchanges. There's so much knowledge that is not anecdotal, that's the wrong word, but that doesn't make it into papers, like especially around methods. I think that's one of the most interesting things I learned in my PhD is how much a tiny difference in a solution or in the temperature that you record at for brain slices, how things like that you wouldn't even think would factor in, how huge of a difference that can make in your results. And all of that knowledge doesn't really make it into a paper, or if it does, it gets kind of skipped over and you don't think to consider it. But having these kinds of conversations and having podcasts that summarize all of the literature at once, you can get into that more, I hope.
That's a really good point. I feel like a lot of the things that I've learned have been from talking to other people at conferences and emailing directly to professors or to students from papers to ask them questions. And I didn't do that near the start of my PhD. And I've sort of gotten more comfortable with doing that. And also with COVID, I've gotten more comfortable with just like emailing people across the world about their research. And there's so many things that aren't published in papers that are sometimes key to making the experiments work, unfortunately. And it's definitely good to really collaborate. And most people are happy to answer your questions, and they're excited that you're interested. And
we can have a spin-off podcast with all of the things that were not published each month. Yeah, or just, we had talked about like conversations with the authors and sort of eventually having interviews with authors of some of the papers and seeing if they want to like add a little detail or add a story about how they came to write that paper, what the experiments that didn't make it in were and stuff. Maybe 3 years from now.
I think that's a great idea. I don't know if any of you went to SFN the last few years, but they had like a special session for one of their smaller talk sessions that's about storytelling and neuroscience. And they're like kind of trying to make this bridge between the actual stories that people have and their research. And it's a really interesting, different types of things that I went to, I think, 2 of them the last couple of years at SFN. And it's interesting to hear the stories behind why somebody got into research and into the field that they're in, or hear stories about the experiments themselves and, the struggles that they had, like what ended up culminating to this paper that you wouldn't know about. That's something that's really cool that SFN's done the last few years. And maybe more conferences will start doing that as well, and podcasts.
Yeah, that sounds great. There are a couple podcasts that do that a little bit. We should add them to the list of crossover episodes later. I know Broad Science is a good one for sort of stories around science and research, and a lot of really great storytelling there. Same with, I think, Confabulation. There's a couple. I'll send a list. But I think that, it really humanizes research, and a lot of little details come out that don't make it into the paper, as we've already said.
Well, thanks a lot, because there are days after like 8 hours of AMiNDR or 10 hours, I'm like, why do people even care? I'm tired. So it's nice to hear that, like, people,
I've been there.
Ellen, I know that this last weekend was really hard on you too, so. Yeah, but honestly, like I said, if it's something people find valuable, and I hear that it do, and at least in the team, to me, that's all I need. Then it's like, there's purpose and there's a reason for it.
Yeah, that's definitely,
All right. Does someone want to wrap up? Is there any like last words, thoughts that didn't get a chance to share today?
I'll just say that this is really enjoyable. It was nice to have a sort of, a natural conversation rather than a meeting. It's been, and I think that's like, it's hard to distinguish those things. And, especially working in a team, it's easy to get caught up in the logistics and not to have time or not to want to make time to just sit back and enjoy. And so this has been really nice. That's my final thoughts.
This is where great ideas come from, these conversations.
I was just going to say, I agree. I think this is really nice and something worthwhile to do for other episodes in the future as well, to do this reflection and discuss the podcast.
Yeah, this has been really nice. I really appreciated the chat tonight.
Hopefully our listeners agree. I think find it super meditative to watch. I mean, I know I said this at the beginning, but the waves, like I'm watching little fish bones and like there's a couple men in sombreros who went by. I'm not high. It's just like really relaxing to watch our audio go. Anyway,
you should do that. You should do some editing if you like watching this stuff.
That's you're trying to recruit me to the editing team, eh?
You want to do some sorting too?
Well, if you make it like aesthetically pleasing for me, then maybe.
So for our listeners, like just so they get a bit of context, usually when we record, we have a script and we're just reading the script. And some people might interject with some observations or jokes or make it flow more naturally. I know I don't. I script my jokes. But that's why this feels so nice to be able to just talk like this and exchange thoughts and have another person on the other side, because talking into the void into a mic is really odd. Not very natural. There's no one around. I just speak to myself. So this is nice.
Yeah.
Your jokes don't sound scripted, Sarah. I didn't know you scripted them.
You should edit that out.
I script some of them. I script some, not all of them, to be honest. But some is more like when you're summarizing, something comes to your mind. You're like, oh, this would be funny to say. So I'll write it down. All right. Well, thanks for joining us tonight for this this very chill celebration of our 1-year anniversary. It's been a pleasure working with all of you and all of our team really in AMiNDR. Stay tuned for more plugs from other members of the team on social media if you want to hear from them and hear a bit about what their experience has been with AMiNDR.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you all.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Have a great evening, everyone.
Bye.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.